So, good evening. Welcome to the sunset stream for April 19th, 2022. So, this sunset stream, I've had a bit of a gap in what should have been a weekly installment of live streams. Previous to this, I was doing a weekly installment of live streams that I would do just with myself, that would go offline. And then, basically, because of scheduling, I was forced to schedule a variety of other live streams in this slot. One was with my friend Anglo Ortho and another person who I met at the Sildings conference. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he's a wonderful gentleman, and we discussed basically the 2000s and sort of the period of coming of age within that period. And then the week before this one, I should say last week, I had to cancel this stream to do a live stream with Adam and Sitch, which is essentially what I'm going to be talking about right now. And I guess, I should give some people a chance to trickle in, so to speak, to kind of. I know people don't want me to launch right into the main topic, but this week, what I was hoping to do would be to just give a little bit of a rehash of my interaction with Adam and Sitch. For those people who don't know, Adam and Sitch, I don't really know their ideology. They call themselves radical centrists or liberals. And I guess sort of the lack of ideological clarity on their side will be part of the topic here. But I've been kind of in continuous dialogue with this community for about 6 to 8 months since the end of last summer. And I don't know. I think the relationship has been deteriorating. And I've always kind of wanted to reach out to these people and try to really reach out to their audiences, because I believe very distinctly that they're kind of merchants of a certain type of arrested intellectual development. That their view of the world is incoherent, it's not suited for the times. And although, well, I guess I used to have a very high opinion of Adam and Sitch as people and as creators, I felt that they really hadn't thought a lot of things through, and their positions were incredibly, I don't want to say naive, but they weren't taking on board sort of the state of the actual controversy. And the only thing they could do is sort of lift up a fake and moderate position and pretend like this was some kind of solution, that society could come together and agree on this halfway point. This is my main frustration with the centrists, again, is that, and this is sort of what I wanted to wake them up from, is that these middle ground positions, they don't work anymore, and they don't work anymore for very distinct reasons. Claiming, for instance, the banner or the mantle of liberalism, for instance, is all well and good. I don't have any problem with liberalism, but there are distinct issues with implementing liberalism in modernity, in sort of in particular the post-civil rights era, which I've gotten to with them many times before. And what I feel constantly is hearing them talk to their audience is that the stereotype is that they want to go back to the 90s. And certainly that's the feeling you get. But they don't take on board the actual criticisms that are coming from their interlocutors. They just want to scoff at them. They just want to put them down. They don't actually want to understand what the critiques are or respond to them. Now, initially, this whole live stream, the back and forth between Adam, Sitch, and myself, started with a controversy with Academic Agent. And I don't know, Academic Agent does not particularly like live streams or contentious debates, and I don't personally blame him. It's not really many people's thing, and it oftentimes sheds more heat than it does light. And I wanted to not really defend I would defend Academic Agent as a person, but I was less interested in defending his particular points than really the position of the right wing itself and its criticism of the kind of point of view that Adam and Sitch want to advance. A lot of the issues, I'm not even so sure what the point of view Adam and Sitch want to advance, really. It seems like they just want to advance a position where they can scoff at everyone. It reminds me a little bit of the New Atheists, where this feels like a negative position without any substance to it. But post my initial interaction with both of them, we got into this cycle where Adam and Sitch would continuously mischaracterize my positions in ways that I think were kind of ridiculous. For instance, in the initial live stream, I said that we needed more low-skilled jobs for African Americans. And Adam immediately translated that into Dave wants to force all African Americans to have low-skilled jobs because he thinks they're all dumb. I mean, it's things like that. And then, you think, okay, maybe it's a joke, right? But then you hear Adam, and in particular Sitch, repeat these mischaracterizations when I'm not there later, until when I talk about the Amish and more intentional communities in a live stream with them. 2 weeks later, they've transformed my position into wanting to enforce segregation on the entire continental United States. So I guess it kind of got to a boiling point because I occasionally listen to their live streams, and their live streams have really taken a downturn in terms of quality. Here in particular, I'm thinking Adam has really, really gone downhill in his intellectual quality. He used to be a somewhat curious person who liked ideas, and now he basically operates in the conversation to shoot down any attempt to go deeper into intellectual points, and all he does is organize dog piles. And I think this really comes to a head. I mean, it's not even like I haven't even got the worst of it. Oftentimes when you talk about this stuff on Twitter or with Adam, when you're doing a live stream with him, he immediately personalizes it. Like, this is my problem. Yeah, I mean, I haven't gotten the worst of it. For instance, the person who's gotten the worst of it from what I've heard is Aiden Paladin, who Adam frequently has on and treats like total dog shit. He insults her to her face. He mischaracterizes her. And, it's obvious that she's not in on the joke because she's very visibly upset at this. And, but this is the shtick now, I guess. This is the shtick. You just mischaracterize people and put them down and do little character assassinations, even when they're right in front of you. And then, that's some kind of comedy show. I guess the thing is, it's always hard to tell with Adam and Sitch because they are really playing the Jon Stewart line where you can't tell whether this is performance, whether people are actually getting something out of this that's a consistent worldview, because you get the sense that the audience themselves don't even really know the worldview. And they know that the position they should be in. They know that the optics they want is that they are the focal point of sanity in an insane world. And you've got insane characters to the right, and you've got insane characters to the left, and they are the point of non-motion. They are the center of gravity, and their job is to point out the little inconsistencies in anyone else without taking stock of how the changes on the ground have actually impacted your worldview. Now, this is I don't really know what to make of this because I don't really consider this to be responsible. I remember this, and it's funny that this came up. That the thing that inspired me to go back on the Adam and Sitch's the text that inspired me to re-engage with Adam and Sitch, because they covered it on their show, was Jon Stewart's woke turn, where he totally badgers Andrew Sullivan. Now, everyone remembers Jon Stewart as the comedian who made everybody in my generation moderate Democrat centrists. He was the Adam and Sitch of 2005. The thing is, it was, when you were watching Jon Stewart, he was selling you a certain ideology, but it wasn't really clear what that ideology was. It was just a general perspective that everyone else, well, in particular right-wingers, were mouth-breathing idiots. And nothing was really discussed about how, okay, well, this historical event this presents a problem for your worldview, doesn't it? Or where do you fall on this complicated issue? All it is sort of scoffing and then equivocating around the problems in your own ideology without acknowledging whether they might exist or not. And this is sort of what I want to disrupt in Adam and Sitch's. I mean, I feel like they basically copied Jon Stewart's business model. And then so lo and behold, Jon Stewart's audience grow up to become sort of apathetic centrists who think comedy is, or who think politics is a function of entertainment, and they're blindsided by the fact that Jon Stewart is essentially a radical left-winger, which, I mean, was obvious if you pay attention to his stuff. It was obvious he was a true believer in this. It was obvious that he took on board all these radical premises. But you watching the show, being part of the comedy, you were never forced to come to terms with that dimension of his character. And the same thing is true with Adam and Sitch. Adam and Sitch understand. So in Jon Stewart's interaction with Andrew Sullivan, again, Andrew Sullivan being the idiot conservative that he is, and I think, well, I know he's an intelligent man, but to not see this coming involved a certain amount of practical stupidity that is almost hard to believe coming from Andrew Sullivan. But he tries to do the classic conservative move where he rolls out the equality under the law, Martin Luther King's, by the content of our character, not by the color of our skin, and tries to invoke that against some particularist idea that we have to favor a certain protected class, that we have to disadvantage a certain non-protected class, which is pretty much the same thing. And obviously, Sitch and Adam are totally on Andrew Sullivan's side. Oh my God, why can't they just see that the majesty of Dr. Martin Luther King's by the content of her character and not by the color of our skin? But then, the thing is that Sitch understands. I don't think Adam understands this, but Sitch understands that this argument is really showing its age. And it's really showing its age because this argument is not new. It's not even marginally new. It was used throughout the Republicans in the 80s and more particularly in the 90s with characters like Charles Murray and Dinesh D'Souza when they were arguing against affirmative action. There is a resurgence of a debate around affirmative action in the late 90s surrounding a Supreme Court case and also a California proposition that hypothetically legalized affirmative action. And in this conversation on affirmative action, the Republican arguments were roundly dismissed by moderate progressives like me at the time and like obviously Sitch. And so Sitch, in this conversation, in this discussion of this interaction between Andrew Sullivan and Jon Stewart, where Andrew Sullivan bravely tries to use equality under the law, equal protection against wokeness, he tries to explain it away as, well, the Republicans in the 80s and 90s used this argument in bad faith, and that's why people don't like it anymore. But now it's somehow pertinent. Well, I mean, this is sort of the issue. The issue is that there is really no qualitative difference between how Andrew Sullivan is using the argument in 2022 and how Rush Limbaugh was using it in 1992. The facts on the issue at hand, the issue at play, is can broad exceptions be made in equality under the law or equal protection? Can broad exceptions be made to equal protection in the service of achieving some form of racial parity or racial equity? And the answer to that question, pretty explicitly since the 80s and 90s, by the ruling class and by all intellectual people and by all moderates, because we all scoffed at these arguments when Rush Limbaugh brought them up, was yes, it's fine to do that as long as the goal is racial equity. And really, since then, none of the facts have changed on the ground. There have been, this is the thing, I can tell Sitch is reaching for some reason why his objections to further tampering with this principle are somehow qualitatively different than the ones the Republicans brought up in the 90s. But I'd be really hard-pressed to see what that is. If you're against racial preferences now, and you think that's a good faith argument, and you think that's a proper argument, what were you doing calling out Rush Limbaugh and all these other actors like Dinesh D'Souza in 1999? The same facts on the ground persist. In the 70s, I guess it was more forgivable because in the 70s, it wasn't clear what affirmative action was. People thought it was a tiebreaker. People thought that the purview of affirmative action was limited, that it was only for certain government offices, and people thought that it would be, most importantly, incredibly temporary. But by 1999, when this debate resurfaced, affirmative action had been around for like 35 years. And we were pretty far away from the end of Jim Crow at that stage. The end of Jim Crow had come in at 64 or something like that. So we were pretty far away from this. I should say affirmative action was more like 25 years old, but it was the same concept. And the more important issue was that racial achievement gaps hadn't narrowed at all for about 20 years, and they still haven't. So the idea that this would be a temporary fixture was absolutely ridiculous. It couldn't possibly be a temporary fixture unless you just wanted to say, oh yeah, we tried affirmative action and now we're going to de-diversify these offices that are basically held in their current state of diversity by these differential policies. So there's sort of a hard point here, and I think this was something that the centrists didn't understand. I think there is a question about why was I going in this direction? Why was I pointing this out? The thing is that throughout these centrist arguments, you'll see a variety of things like this. You'll see a variety of points, of critiques that they are using against the wokies that are essentially recycled Republican talking points. These are points that were tried and failed by past conservatives, and now they're being picked back up again by moderates, now that the left has increased its share of the power. And they think that somehow if they use the exact same argument this time, it's somehow going to work in a way that didn't work before. And there's no understanding that there's almost no possibility that this is going to work. Affirmative action is harder to attack now than it was in 1999. It was harder to attack in 1999 than it was in 1989. The power and the force that we have to oppose these things is weakening. They are on the losing side of the battle. And their strategy is to cop the playbook off the losers in the culture war. And this, to me, just indicates that what Adam and Sitch are trying to sell their audience is, I'm sorry, it's just a false bill of goods. It's the same thing that Jon Stewart was doing in his show. He was selling sort of an attitude of comfort, but one that obfuscated the hard questions about what the age actually was demanding of people. The problem we're dealing with right now is that we have been cutting exceptions to liberal principles pretty hard for about 30 or 40 years right now in the name of civil rights. Furthermore, a lot of things that people thought were essential features of a liberal worldview, namely some kind of cohesive identity and some kind of firm moral background, those have been also degrading for the last 30 years. So what we have right now when we talk about centrist liberalism, it's basically a principle that has been undermining its own rules and that has been degrading its own principles for 30 or 40 years. Now, if you come from my school of political thought, or my academic agent's school of political thought, we can explain the mechanism through which this occurs. It's not an absolute certainty. It's not something that always happens. But when you introduce a system of liberalism into an open marketplace of ideas, what happens is that the moral systems and the rules that sort of guard power's expansion, those tend to degrade slowly over time unless active effort is taken to stop them from degrading. It's like rust. You constantly have to be fighting it, or it's basically going to be consuming you alive. And in the 60s, we basically stopped fighting it. And as Christopher Hitchens used to say, long have the termites dined. And now we're in a situation where it's really very hard to take any liberal principle seriously, because almost all of the promises liberalism made have been routinely violated, and moreover, they have constituencies that want to see them continuously eroded into the future. Now, I don't exactly know what Adam's position is on this, and I frankly don't care. I think that, really at this stage, he's become more of an entertainer than a thinker. This is, I don't know. I can't see through the act anymore, because he's so belligerent, and he's so freely misinterprets people for comedic effect and then labels them with insulting terms. Think back to the interpretation of "we need more low-skilled jobs for African Americans" being interpreted by Adam as an insult to African Americans. I mean, come on. I don't know. I really don't want to tackle Adam's position on this anymore. It's tiresome, and if he wants to be taken seriously, he's going to have to develop a better shtick than what he's currently running. And I don't care if the Aiden Paladin Adam dynamic is some kind of, what do they call it in wrestling, kayfabe or whatever. I don't care if it's not a proper way to conduct a debate, and it's kind of disgusting even if it is a play fight. But I think Sitch is in a position that's a little bit different. I think Sitch portrays himself as someone who's more serious, who takes ideas more seriously. And there's not a doubt in my mind that Sitch understands the criticism that I'm bringing. It's not a new criticism. This is an idea that virtually all of our founding fathers believed in. Perhaps Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine, if you consider Thomas Paine a founding father. I guess he's sort of a founding foster father a little bit, not properly one, but ideologically he's involved. Potentially Jefferson and Paine notwithstanding, almost all of our founding fathers understood the critique that I laid out about liberalism. It is not a new critique, and it's one that they don't take seriously when they look at how their own arguments in defense of liberalism and centrism don't feel fresh and new. They feel old. And they feel old because they've been failing for 30 years. And anyone who tries them again is probably going to fail in a similar way. And this is something that I desperately think that their audience needs to hear. But I think Sitch knows that this critique is there. I think he knew that I would call him out for his wishy-washy view on affirmative action. As a matter of fact, this is sort of a funny thing. When I talked to him about this, I asked him, okay, are the Republicans right or wrong in the 80s and 90s about their position on affirmative action? He starts laying out a defense of affirmative action as being both a properly liberal principle and good policy. And then, somewhere on Twitter, I think if I didn't know better, I would say that Adam caught up with him and told him that his chat was totally against him on this. He decided that this defense that he gave me in terms of for affirmative action, this was all just devil's advocate. Like, he didn't believe this. He was arguing as if someone else was arguing this. But I was asking about his position. It would be like if I said, so your arguments are like the Catholics who imprisoned Galileo, who believed that the sun revolved around the earth. And then the person was to immediately respond, well, there's a lot of good arguments for the sun revolving around the earth. There's this argument from Aristotle, and there's this argument from Ptolemy, and blah, 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 blah. And he went on for 20 minutes. One would be forgiven for thinking that was actually an indication that you believe that this was a legitimate, that this was a good position to have. But no. We have to, this is apparently in hindsight, Sitch is claiming that he's against affirmative action. He's always been against affirmative action. And it's crazy for me to think that his argument for affirmative action a week ago was actually his argument about his opinions. It was him arguing for somebody who wasn't him, who wasn't there. And okay, that's fine. And this is sort of how the argument proceeded. And then, of course, halfway through the conversation, Sitch gets on his little... I think he pre-prepared this. I think he pre-prepared getting angry at me. He accused me of being evasive. He accused me of being evasive. And this was pretty rich, because I've been nothing but explicit about my positions on any question they've asked me on the 2 times I've been on their show and on Twitter. And what was so funny is that, I was talking about their position, and somehow, the big flaw in my critique of their position was that I was not being explicit about my own position. So a complete dodge on that front. But what was so difficult is that Sitch couldn't even figure out what question I hadn't answered. He wanted to say that I was evasive, and that was settled in his mind. he settled in his mind that I was not answering some question, but he hadn't figured out yet which question I hadn't answered. Like he was still kind of working on that, right? He was desperate to find a question I hadn't answered, so he kind of modified them. So first he's like, "You're evasive because you're not telling me the name of your philosophy." Easy. I immediately told him the school of my political philosophy is Italian elitism, and my moral philosophy is Catholic social justice. This has been the case in my channel for 4 years. I've made videos on it. I've recommended books about these things. I have some outstanding videos that I promised involving these concepts that people have criticized me for not making. Probably that's a legitimate criticism, but me being explicit about the name of my philosophy and thinkers in the school of my philosophy is ridiculous. I have named, like, you can go out and you can read James Burnham, you can read de Juvenal, you can read Curtis Yarvin, you can read G.K. Chesterton, you can read Hilaire Belloc, and knock yourselves out, guys. They're there. I can recommend some good books. Okay, well, no, that's not that, right? After I answer that question, oh, no. Of course, anyone can give a name, but can you give policies? Policies. That's how you're being evasive. Anyone can give a name, but do you have any things that we could do right now? I named 5 policies. And Adam is outraged because they're not liberal. Well, I never said they would be liberal. I never said that they wouldn't be. But these policies were geared towards things that I thought we could hypothetically do in the present era. And they came down to completely stop mass migration and tie it to the natural birth rate of the country. So not net zero, but net whatever the population growth is. The country grows first from birth, then from immigration, in that order. Second, I want a complete reform of the university systems so that we can file most of these universities into Chapter 11 because they are bankrupting America's youth and they need to handle a slice of that. Then we bankrupt them, we completely nationalize, reform them, and fire their administrative staff down to a man. Second, a giant jobs work program. Third, a reimagining of our civil rights legislation to allow and encourage intentional communities in certain minority populations. Minority being broadly construed and not narrowly as protected classes are in our present era. And then also, I guess this was sort of optional, sort of a reimagining of the American creed and encouraging of classical religions and classical patriotism. So these were some ideas. They'll never get done in the present era, and they would involve going against numerous promises we've made post civil rights. And of course, Adam was falling over himself to call this illiberal and blah blah blah. And Sitch, of course, I don't think he actually wanted to debate any of these policies because I think many of them would have been quite popular among his audience if they had been debated on their merits. So again, the goalpost shift. And so since he's you're not evasive about the name of your philosophy, you're not evasive about the policies, you're evasive about your ideal system. Like, what would you want in an ideal world? And I told him, I said, Sitch, this is, in my ideal world, everyone would be moral, and we would all be religious, and we could pull off liberalism. I'm not against liberalism if it works. I'm not against liberalism if we have the proper basis for it, the proper preconditions for it working, which all 18th century liberals pointed out was a moral and unified population. The problem is we don't have that. But in an ideal world, if we were all perfect Catholics or perfect Protestants or perfect Calvinists, liberalism would be an amazing system. Self-government is a good thing. It is a flower of a successful civilization. But, then again, we get into this thing, oh, well, okay, that's not good enough, right? Because since it's not happening right now, this is not, you're being evasive again. You're being evasive. And this kind of keeps on going on, but because I think that liberalism is ideal, but not suited for the present era, because my policies can't be implemented, and would need an incredible amount of force to be implemented to fix this current situation. This is not me being pessimistic. This is not me having a more fatalistic political worldview or one that is sort of not ready for implementation. This is just me being evasive about what I believe, which I don't really consider in good faith. But of course, this kicks up again on Twitter, and of course, all of Adam's fans are on this dog pile. They all think that I'm evasive now. They don't know anything about me. They haven't watched the channel, but they just repeat whatever Sitch says. And they all know that I'm evasive, but they can't name the question that I haven't answered. So eventually, Sitch understands that I've answered his first 4 questions, so he cooks up a 5th one. And the 5th one is, well, do you think in this present moment, monarchy or some form of Caesarism would be preferable? Something that could implement the radical policies, the quote-unquote radical policies. These policies wouldn't be radical for an FDR, but they would be radical in our present age. Would a Caesarism be preferable? And I told him, I said, recommending or commending Caesarism in a moment is like amputating a leg that has gangrene on it. It's a really tough call. But if I was forced to make it, I'd probably say that Caesarism would be necessary. But I think in 10 or 20 years, as we continue to degrade, as things continue to get worse, and they manifestly are getting worse, and even if the economy turns up, the idea that liberalism is going to recover from this, and the promises that liberalism makes is going to recover from this process is highly, highly doubtable in my opinion. So in 10 years' time, it's going to be more clear that our system is going to need massive, massive reform. Now, by Caesarism, do I mean someone who literally comes in and declares himself king? Almost certainly not. It'll be more like an FDR, who they'll basically rule by dictate, by the phone and by the pen, and Congress will rubber stamp everything they do, and it will essentially be a giant social club. That's probably what will happen. And it will be highly regrettable and highly sad, because that was a beautiful element. Self-government was a beautiful element of our society, but it's just not suited for the kind of people we've become, the kind of immoral people that we've degraded into in the past 100 years. But again, I don't even know if they've retracted this, because as soon as Adam said that, as soon as Sitch said, okay, that's my question, you've answered it, Adam goes right back on. He whips up the Twitter mob again, saying I'm evasive because I haven't put the proper legwork in understanding their liberal philosophy. And at this point, I kind of just given up. I mean, I don't know what to say at this stage. It kind of reminds me. So I did this Oxford debate when I was in high school. For those of you who don't know, Oxford debate is this kind of competitive debate that people do in high school and sometimes in college, and it is the biggest cancer of all time. It's a horrible kind of debate. It's sort of a competitive rhetoric, but in Oxford style debate, you actually need to cite sources while you debate. So before iPhones, people carried around these huge tubs of evidence, of cue cards, where they could cite studies and try to outflank each other in a debate environment to impress judges who hadn't read any of these studies and were just going from pure basically reading the titles and basically dropping studies like BreadTube likes dropping studies. I haven't read them. I haven't even read the abstract. This just sounds like it supports me, and I've read it off a Google Doc. So this is Oxford debate, and you have all these layers of it, right? So there's the debate where you argue via sources on merit, and then there's these certain kinds of things called critiques. And there's this other thing called topicality, which is like a critique, but not really a critique. And critiques, what they do is they basically say that your opponents don't have standing to make an argument. That somehow the fact that the debate's taking place itself is wrong and shouldn't be happening. And your opponent should be discounted before you've even heard his arguments. Just dismiss him for X, Y, and Z reason. And usually when I was in school, the standard critique was intersectionality, that this debate was racist for some reason. And the premises were racist. So you can't even discuss privacy because the debates, even discussing privacy itself is racist, sexist, homophobic. And this is like 20 or 15 years before the Great Awakening. It was really quite ahead of its time, actually. And so what was funny is that there's this other condition called topicality, which is this isn't what we're here to talk about, right? The case you're bringing is not actually what we agreed to debate to. And before you got some kind of resolution at the beginning of the season, like privacy or school or something like that. And so I remember one time that we were in a tournament and the opposing team brought in a case that was just amazing. We had never seen it before, so we didn't have any of the cue cards that had the counter arguments on them. And it was totally significant. It had something to do with the NSA. It was brilliant. It looked like a big problem. The judge would almost certainly vote on it, and we had zero counter arguments. So what we did was we just argued that it was not topical, that somehow the resolution of privacy did not include this, and that that they were committing a faux pas. They were trying to. We came here to debate privacy. And they're cheating you out of that debate by bringing this crazy, objection that isn't even privacy. We wanted to discuss privacy. And of course, we sounded very, very indignant because at all cost, we never actually wanted to engage with the substance of the arguments because we had no counter arguments. What we wanted to tell the judges were, this is not what we debated. They're doing something bad. They're being evasive. They're being sneaky. They're trying to do something underhanded. They're not being clear with you. They're basically cheating you. They're cheating you by bringing in a case that's just not what we debated, and we can't be prepared for it. So it's their fault that we have no arguments against their side and vote against them. And we had no argument against them. And of course, the judge after the debate said, you made the better case, but I hate voting on topicality because of this. And that's really what I feel like with this whole Adam and Sitch thing. I think they understand the criticisms I'm making, both against liberalism and against their centrist positions, which are essentially recycled, warmed over Republican talking points from the early 2000s that everyone can feel as being stale right now. People have seen these kinds of talking points. We know they don't work. Adam and Sitch are very aware, I believe, that this criticism holds water, and I think they have very little to say against it when they actually hear it out and try to debate on its merits. So their best defense against this is to try to discount what I'm saying on some kind of technicality. Like, we brought you on to discuss X, and you discussed Y. Or you're being evasive because you haven't answered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. And, if you've answered 5 questions, have you answered the 6th question? And I'm sure right now, Sitch is cooking up a 7th question that I haven't answered about my philosophy. Believe me, I could answer questions all the live long day. But they're only looking for a label so that this objection can go away. This objection needs to go away because if the objection stays on the table, then their entertainment product, their Jon Stewart, let's be in the center and convince everyone that we're winning, we're comfortable, and everyone else is idiots, that entertainment product is lessened. It feels less safe. And if your position in the center feels less safe, it's less funny. It's less good as something that people want to give super chats to. And I guess I don't really want to cut in on their gig, but my big problem here is that I kind of want to tell their audience, you shouldn't be feeling safe in the center. You shouldn't be. I mean, if the modern political environment is a joke, then the joke is on the centrists, because as right as you think you are, you haven't fully taken on stock the situation that we're in. In some regards, not in some regards, in almost all regards, I find Sargon's position to be much more tenable. Sargon's position has a name. I know he does not like this label, but this is what he has become. It's what he is. Sargon is a conservative. He is what Roger Scruton is. He may have some modifications. He may have some caveats, but he is a conservative. And I think there's a lot of problems with conservatism, but at least it's very firm in what it is. It has credentials. It's aware that it's making certain claims about the universe. Conservatives' proposition is that they can somehow arrest this process of progressivization, and that they can create a space for which the principles and the morality conservatives know liberalism needs can somehow thrive next to liberalism. Now, is this impossible? No. It's like cold fusion. It is technically possible that this could be done. But like cold fusion, the sort of practical details of how our system actually works makes this almost impossible to practically do in real life. And so conservatism, I think it's a very intellectually respectable tradition, but it's not one that is something that you should put your hope into, much less radical centrism, which can't even keep its own presuppositions straightforward. Because most of the things that they promote, like affirmative action and gay marriage and half these other protected classes and half of these other social issues that they're banging their drums on about throughout the 2000s, these have all contributed more to the rise of wokeness than any half-forgotten radical critical theory professor like Derek Bell or Kimberly Crenshaw back in 1985. I mean, okay, sure, I know these people cite those people, but really, it's more of a pull system than a push. People in these affirmative action positions look for thinkers like Noel Ignatieff and Kimberly Crenshaw because they're looking for a reason to justify their equal opportunity funding for the next fiscal year. And these radical theorists give them an intellectual basis to do that. It's the institution. It's I don't know if they still call these things thoroughly liberal, but certainly Sitch was a week ago. It's the thoroughly liberal, quote unquote, civil rights reforms you instituted that gave people the money to fuel this fire. And now you're sitting watching this system completely conquer every institution in your society, and you're laughing at them for being stupid. Dude, bro, they have the whip hand over you. They're the ones who are calling the shot over what happens in the future. They're the people who are educating the new generation. And if you look at support for things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, any kind of equality under the law when it cuts against progressive principles, support for all of those things is tanking with the younger Zoomers and with the new, what did they call them, alpha generation. The future is not looking like a radical centrist utopia. Oh, sure, fine. If this is comedy gold and you're laughing at this and you're feeling good about that, I don't want to stop your fun. But if this is the extent of, like, if you're believing this stuff and you're feeling solid in it and you're feeling confident, man, I mean, you need to look a little bit deeper into this stuff, because Adam and Sitch, the security Adam and Sitch feel in their own positions is not warranted. These arguments aren't going to hold up. They're not going to be entertained by the people in power. And furthermore, I think they obfuscate the things you should be thinking about. So, when I wrote out the many questions that Sitch said I was obfuscating over, I immediately thought, well, really what I should be talking about is what I would want to communicate, not really to Sitch, because I don't think I think he knows the critique. I really do think he understands it. He doesn't want to engage with it, but I think he understands it. And I don't think Adam really cares. But what would I communicate to their audience? What I would communicate to their audience is, I think, a few things. I'll just pull up my notes here. So the first thing, if you're a centrist, the first thing you need to understand is that liberalism, or any idea of centrism, is not going to save you. These ideas of liberalism, or also any notion of common sense, Like we call the SJWs, I don't think people call them SJWs anymore, the wokies now, same people, we call them crazy, but no one's stopping them. There's no barrier to them in government. There's no barrier to them in the corporate world. They will rule over you in HR departments. And if you try to be like, if you have a conversation like Andrew Sullivan did with that woke scold on Jon Stewart's show, if you have that conversation in an HR meeting, you'll be putting your professional life at serious risk. And it doesn't matter how much Adam and Sitch tell you that those are awesome arguments. They do not hold up in any kind of public forum. And any promise you think you've been given otherwise is pretty illusory at this point. Liberalism will not save you because our concept of rationality and our concept of right and wrong are being eroded as we speak right now. Liberalism and liberal rights and individual rights are just promises. They are enforced by a sincere conviction. We had freedom of speech because a lot of Americans believed freedom of speech was a good thing. We had freedom of association, at one point at least, because a lot of Americans deeply believed that freedom of association was an essential thing. Slowly, through the mechanism of liberalism and open political discourse, political expediency erodes sincere conviction in the name of politics and money. And so you get what are called little exceptions. And if these exceptions grow and are allowed to metastasize, which they have been for the last 40 years, they slowly erode the principle, and they slowly take over the education institution, and they slowly teach people that the liberal principles we once believed in are no longer in effect, which they pretty much have already for college students, and they are creeping into younger and younger ages. The people who will believe in liberal principles will be minority populations and communities. The second thing I'd say to Adam and Sitch's centrist crowd is that your problems are foundational. Now, this is something that they couldn't really figure out, is that this is so funny about my last conversation, is that Adam immediately called my policy ideas massively illiberal. But by the end of the show, Sitch turned tables and said, well, these policy positions you proposed, they're all just common sense. They're all just liberalism in a different form. And they couldn't keep their story straight by this. But what I proposed, those sort of the total reform of civil rights, the total reform of the education system, the total reorganization of media, the total reorganization of the federal government in terms of monetary policy and jobs programs, like this would be a foundational restructuring of the United States that we haven't seen since the New Deal. This would be a massive, radical, and foundational shift. It also would be the minimal shift in order to do any kind of turn back towards sanity. The difficulty is that there's this idea that Sitch harbors in particular that somehow a minor correction is going to deviate from this path. So originally, if you rewind back to basically a year or two ago when the Adam and Sitch show started, Sitch was really onto this idea that once Trump left office, then the left would moderate. Once the orange man was no longer goading them, this woke stuff would go away and Biden would remoderate back towards the center. Did that happen? Did any of that happen? Of course it didn't. Anyone who had two eyes in their head would know that this woke stuff emerged in the Obama administration, not in the Trump administration. Trump was, if anything, a reaction to it, and it only goes in one direction. And no amount of democratic victories fix wokeness. You can't give them more power and get them to stop this process. That's not how the machine operates. You give the machine more power, it tries to take more power. That's what it does. So now, of course, Adam and Sitch have shifted. Now, as opposed to democratic victory being the off-ramp, now it's, okay, well, Republicans are going to clean up in the midterms, and that will cause Democrats to have a mea culpa moment, a come to Jesus, and then they'll moderate. Really? I mean, did they moderate when Trump won? If they didn't moderate when Trump won, why would they moderate when Republicans beat them in 2022? It's the same deal. There's no money in moderation. There's no power in moderation. If they moderated, they would lose their grip on the institutions that they're trying to lead. They would alienate their core audience. They can't do that. In order to actually get them to moderate, you'd have to cut off their funding sources, which are essentially the civil rights bureaucracies, the actual New Deal bureaucracies, the educational institution, and the media. And you'd have to provide new sources of funding through jobs programs, through encouraging families, that would supplant the funding streams that the left has essentially cordoned off and kept to itself. That's the only way to unseat this power structure, not through switching back between Republicans and Democrats, hoping that subsequent elections will either feeding the Democrats more power or chastising it by temporarily taking away from them is going to force them to moderate. That's not how this works. The only way moderation occurs is if the institutions that are feeding power and money into these systems are actually reformed, and that is a foundational change. It's a foundational change to how the academy is organized. It's a foundational change to how we think about problems and how we organize our system of government. It's probably a foundational change to how we conceptualize individual rights and how we conceptualize things like the separation of church and state. Adam and Sitch like saying the separation of church and state needs to be enforced against wokeness, but neither of them have a good explanation of how wokeness got through the security system. Why aren't these wokies getting brought in on these violations the same way that people were getting sued for having under God in the Pledge of Allegiance? I mean, come on, do you remember that controversy in 2004? People were furious about that. Oh my God, there's this under God clause in the Pledge of Allegiance. It's oppressing us. Why isn't that happening? Well, it's because that's not how separation of church and state has ever legally worked. It's a one-way ratchet. So your problems are foundational, and more so, and this is sort of gets to the point. I can tell Sitch that we could accomplish. If a miracle happened, we could accomplish the reforms under liberal principles under the present system, or if things got a lot worse, then there would be some kind of shifting of the elites. And some kind of Caesar figure could fix the problems, blah, 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 blah. I could tell him that. But really, that's not the message I want anyone to take away on the centrist side. The message I want people to take away is that they have to rethink how their politics is done. You don't want to sit back and just try to appeal to things like rights. You want to think about things in terms of realism. And this is something I think I said a few times on the Adam and Sitch show, because I know that Sitch is very famous for having reviews of Game of Thrones. Those are his most popular videos on his channel. And then there's one thing that I really liked about Game of Thrones, even though the show was shit for other reasons. And, I have a very popular video explaining why, and somewhere in my back catalog. But the real reason why I think that this was sort of a useful artifact is that people in the Middle Ages, and Game of Thrones basically depicts medieval Europe, they had a much more practical and realistic notion of how politics works. They didn't sit around debating policy. They didn't sit around discussing rights, or at least not rights in the way that we understand them right now. They understood that really the only thing that matters is loyalty. The only thing that really matters is friend-enemy. And what really defines you is not like what theory you have about politics. It's not what you think the marginal tax rate should be. What defines you is your moral system, the community you follow, and how you express those principles in your day-to-day life. That's what defines a political actor in classically realistic politics. And if there's one thing I want to say to the fans of Adam and Sitch, that is the lesson we should be taking. We shouldn't be thinking about things in terms of liberalism anymore. Liberalism is just a promise, and it's a promise that cannot be fulfilled. The current sovereign cannot fulfill on that promise. They cannot make good on that promise. Real politics is all about the friend-enemy distinction. Who are your friends? Who are your enemies? All dissent is binary. Are you loyal or are you in rebellion? If you agree that our system is in some kind of metastasizing decline, then you are essentially either an active dissenter or you're waiting to be a dissenter, holding your cards close to your chest, as they used to say. Or failing that, you don't feel that something foundationally wrong is present, you're a loyalist, or you're an adherent of the current regime. And you can laugh at the king all you want, you can laugh at the ruling class all you want, but they rule over you still. And their power will only increase until a dissenting coalition is formed and they feel serious pressure to reform, or they're just unseated and a new kind of government can come into being. But more foundational than that, what you have to take away, that I think, the main thing that Adam and Sitch's worldview obscures is that you're not properly doing politics unless you define for yourself some core concept of the good, of morality, of religion, and also of a community that defines your religion. If you were a person that disbelieves, some kind of vague new atheist platitude about how everyone should do what they want, about how we can just rely on liberalism and the love of freedom, and you haven't answered questions about what is the good life, what are the key priorities that people should follow, is family more important than pleasure, is posterity more important than ephemeral liberties in the present, is continuation as a people and godliness more important than some kind of notion of homogeneity or fairness or equality. If you are still attached to those ephemeral principles of the Enlightenment, then you're not going to be able to practice politics in a realistic way, because you're not going to be able to tell who is friend and who is enemy. Because foundationally, what defines your friends and enemies are the people who share some minimal standard, some minimal understanding of what the good life is, of what is proper and what is improper, what is something that's properly ordered, or even potentially, I should say, on whether order itself is better than chaos. This is what creates the real political divisions, and this is why political compromise presently is impossible. We have a situation where half this country believes that educating 8-year-olds about transgenderism is child abuse, and the other half believes that not educating 8-year-olds about transgenderism is child abuse. Those two philosophies are irreconcilable at their most basic philosophical level, and they have to be enemies. But when I see the audience of Adam and Sitch, I see a bunch of people going around, and they're not even clear about what they believe is good or bad, what they believe is proper or improper for humans to pursue. They have a vague notion that they're loyal to promises that are in the process of being broken. And when those processes are cut away, I wonder what will remain. Because a character in Game of Thrones can tell you what gods they believe in, and whether they keep their promises or not. And they can tell you who they will bend a knee to and who they won't bend a knee to, and who has been loyal to them and who's betrayed them. And that is what creates real political discourse, not the ephemera that surrounds liberalism. Liberalism is nice. Liberalism, again, is the fruits of a successful civilization. But it is fundamentally a simulation. It's fundamentally an illusion that's buttressed up by the firmament of a strong moral foundation and strong moral loyalties and strong trust that's born from those loyalties and morality. That loyalty, that trust, that morality has been degraded away. And if it's been degraded away at the societal level, the only thing that will remain when it collapses is what we've individually developed for ourselves and the communities we've developed that share those principles with us. That's all that will remain. And I have to unlock my screen now because I've been ranting. I shouldn't password protect this thing. But that's what I really like the centrists who watch Edmund Sitch to actually think about. But will we ever get there? Will you ever cut through the layers of bullshit and counter accusations? The way they gate the conversation in front of, oh, well, you haven't jumped through this hoop. Oh, well, you haven't jumped through that hoop. Oh, you're being evasive. Vague accusations, goalpost shifting, blah, 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 blah. Anything to get away from the substance of the criticism of liberalism. Anything from pointing to the real things that stand behind political discourse. The ancient things that stand behind political discourse. Well, that's it for the rant. So, thank you so much for watching. I'm going to do the super chats and answer questions right after I cough that water up I just drank. I always hate that. It always happens, You drink some water while you're talking, and immediately the dry throat acts up, and you lose your ability to talk. I'm just kidding. So, guys, actually, in lieu of this, there's been this discussion online about content creators on the right and their relationship with money, which is an entirely... So, as you know, everyone's having serious economic times right now. And what's happening to a lot of content creators on the right is that their funding sources are drying up. And this is a really bad thing. And it's sort of a predictable thing because as right-wingers, our audience are hobbyists. And more than just hobbyists, our main demographic are the middle class and of the aspiring middle class. And the people who are really getting squeezed right now are the aspiring middle class. They're people with homes, they're people with families. They're people who need money to and their grocery bills. I mean, you don't know what your grocery bill looks like until you start having kids and dependents. And I only have one, and you immediately feel it. And so, very understandably, the funding that's coming to right-wing channels is evaporating. Now, I don't know what to say about this because for myself, guys, I work a job. I don't rely on this money. So don't feel obliged to support me personally. But I'm afraid that this is just the situation we're going to have to get used to living in. Because for the left, I mean, there's this typical thing where we go, there's this cope we have as right, not cope, but there's this complaint we have. Well, the left, they get funding up the wazoo, right? They just, they get drowned with super chats. They get financed by all of these NGOs, blah, 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 right? Philosophy Tubes gets money from the government to promote COVID vaccinations and all this other stuff. And ContraPoints has like $1 million Patreon and makes one video a year, if that at this stage. Oh man, I mean, it's not the same situation. It's not symmetrical. The leftist funding, the leftist funding source comes from the government. They essentially get money from the government. People get paid. People don't realize this, but people get paid to be leftists. Like an enormous number of the humanities departments right now are people who are just professionally leftists. So when they consume leftist content, that's almost like a business expense for them. The ideas they see on leftist channels, they incorporate into their own product. Furthermore, the audience for leftist ideas are people who are either really, really young, in which case their income is 100% disposable, or they're people who decided to elect for a life where all of their income is going to be disposable. When you're never planning for a wife or a family, your expenses are incredibly low. When I was in grad school, I never had a problem with money because I never had any dependents. And so you make more money and you get less of it, and it's amazing to see. But that's just the case. And every time I see someone like ContraPoints make $1 million a year, I'm just wondering, where is that money going? Like you could, where is that money actually going? It's purely disposable, right? It's not going to pay off. I mean, maybe it's going to pay off college debts. I shouldn't say that, but it's not going for future education expenses for your child, or for food expenses, or for all the other things that go along with having a family. It's just 100% disposable. And the left is comprised of people who don't have larger bonds that cost them money. So I totally understand the position you guys are in. Just give what you can. And I do appreciate super chats because I am raising a family and this does take the edge off things. So I do appreciate any money you can give. But I just wanted to be understanding in that regard. Okay, so the first super chat is this actually working? Oh, come on. Oh, yes, the first super chat, and we're not even working on this OBS thing. I guess I'll read it if I can't select it. I'm wondering why it's not appearing on... well, this serves me right for not refreshing this OBS thing. Okay, well, I thought I had this all figured out, but apparently I don't. Does the thing just work generally? Interesting. Well, I will just read the super chats then. I'm sorry about that, but 21st Century Reaction says, when someone is paid not to understand, for $3, thank you very much. When someone is paid not to understand, they will make sure not to understand, especially if they are on the atheist, scared of theocracy, accountability. Why not choose wickedness with that worldview? I mean, I kind of want to say that this is something that I kind of understand with Sitch and Adam. I kind of feel a certain amount of sympathy for this. And that is, I understand that they have a show, like that they are actually launching an entertainment product. It's almost not fair because I'm much more at liberty to discuss my own views than they ever will be. And because of that, I kind of want to cut them some slack, but I feel like they could at least acknowledge that these arguments were being made. They could at least react to them with some more candor. And the constant, I mean, there's a shift in Adam in particular, where he's just gone from being somebody who's pretty open to ideas to basically being an insult comic who just makes, who just makes the stupidest kinds of points, completely incapable of reciting his opponent's arguments. And I'm actually getting a little bit more frustrated with this OBS stuff. I don't know why it's doing this, and I'm a little bit... The problem is I don't even exactly know what the problem is. I feel like the problem is probably on Entropy's side, not on OBS's side. But I guess I'll never know. Okay. Well, we'll just go down the super chats. Nerve AMV Maker for $10 US. John Stewart and Adam and Sitch are totally vapid when it comes to solutions. This is not a new phenomenon. Satirists like Voltaire and Mark Twain were also total retards when it came to their actual positive visions on society. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, I think Voltaire is a particularly good example. I think Cicero might also be part of that company. What you're talking about when you look at Cicero and Voltaire and the Mark Twain, right? These are brilliant satirists. They've got cutting wits, but they tend to just say things that are things that have occurred to them. They tend to take opinions because they're fashionable. Very famously, Cicero fought against the ascension of Augustus Caesar, which most historians, both classical and modern, believe to be, I mean, fighting against Augustus Caesar was fighting for Rome's only hope at not descending into permanent civil war at that stage. And I admire Cicero for sticking to his Republican principles, and he was a brilliant, witty political speaker. But his ideas were kind of stupid. Not stupid. They were radically unsuited for the time. And the same thing is true with Voltaire and Mark Twain. Basically, like every fashionable opinion of his time, you'll hear them spout, and very little ancient wisdom. The one exception to this, in my opinion, is G.K. Chesterton, who is somehow able to be both witty and also channel this deep wisdom of the ages. I think it's because he really stayed far away from the fashionable ideas of his own time. He kind of embraced his own cringe. I like to think that I embrace my own cringe as well. Not that I'm saying I'm nearly the genius that G.K. Chesterton was. But because of the fact that he embraced his own cringe, I feel like he has a certain amount of timelessness that I think Mark Twain will struggle to obtain. And I think, Voltaire will always be known for writing this hilarious... I'm speculating that this is the thing that will last, but I always think that Voltaire will be remembered for writing Candide, which is a hilarious satirization of Leibniz's optimistic philosophy, that he had this idea that God always does the best for everyone, but sort of the logical situation of the universe means that we live in the best of all possible universes. And the conditions of original sin just create situations where God couldn't do any better than this world we are in. And of course, Candide is the satirization of this idea. And I think it's a brilliant satire, but the worldview you get coming out of Candide is an incredibly cynical, idiotic Enlightenment view of the world that I don't think has any staying power other than to satirize a particular worldview that was going on at the time, and that probably won't reappear for a very, very long time, because Leibniz, although he's well known for his contributions to calculus, like Newton, very similar character, is not widely known for his theological opinions about how the universe is an optimistic place. That's not something that he is widely known for. The Stewart of Gondor for $5 USA. Dear Dave, I love your work. I'm a young man from the UK who is currently courting a woman who has been touched by modern sexuality, as have I. I'm wondering for falling in love with her despite her past promiscuity, given she has renounced this. If she's renounced her past promiscuity, this is... You have to give people credit for that. Especially... of course, everyone has to live with their past promiscuity. Like, I would say that my sexuality still hasn't completely overcome pornography use in my 20s. I mean, that I can't believe how much it sort of impacted me, but it takes about twice as long or 3 times as long to get over it than the use of it itself. And that's from a male point of view. So that stuff is always there. But the mark of a true king is always to acknowledge sincere repentance and always to welcome people back in the fold when that repentance is sincerely given. This is why Caesar was a true king and not a tyrant, even though he didn't call himself a king, is that he forgave his enemies and he tried always to bring people into the fold. And when you're when you're courting, I should say, proposing sounds too formal. When you're courting a woman, when you're going for the office of husband, you are essentially going for the office of a king. And so magnanimity has to be primary. And part of that magnanimity is taking her at her word. That being said, one thing to keep in mind is that, like Caesar himself, just because you're forgiving and forgetting doesn't mean you shouldn't take certain precautions. Obviously, Caesar should have taken some more precautions about the people he forgave, very famously. So it's good to be aware of that and to have certain boundaries. It's all, and I think that if you have the proper boundaries and you're sure to sort of act confidently in this role, and the woman is making a good faith effort, that should be totally possible. Obviously, the more history, the more effort's going to be taken to rectify that. That's just an unfortunate consequence of our human natures. We all have to live with our pasts, and that's that I have to live with mine, and it gets better. It absolutely does. But think in terms of boundaries. Think in terms of taking active steps to become better at things, and also when you're her husband, if that comes about, you also have to take in regard like her needs as a woman too, right? That has to be very primary responsibility for you, and that has so many dimensions. I can't get to it here in sort of a limited stream. Okay, so the Stewart of Gondor. Yeah, sorry, Nerva and Vindmaker I already answered. Um, okay, oh god, this is the entropy. The entropy chat's just completely impossible to parse. Is it up? Is it down? So, narco Republicans for $3. Extreme positions are of continuous well, hold on. Okay, so the first one is from Narco Republican. This phenomenon of the world is a war of extreme intransigency, which breaks the calculation of comfortable cowardice. And he attributes this to someone called Loreno Gomez, who I don't immediately recognize. That sounds familiar, though. Maybe there was a few Latin right-wing thinkers that might be the attribution. Extreme positions are of continuous struggle, imposed duties and responsibilities. Only the weak and selfish characters fall to the illusion of protecting themselves by keeping out of the battlefield. Well, this is sort of, as we enter a post-liberal age, centrism becomes impossible because being a non-combatant is impossible. You can't be neutral in the face of woke. You can't be neutral in the face of transgenderism. And to be neutral is just to preemptively disarm yourself. You have to find the community, you have to find your principles, and you have to plant your flag. This idea of neutrality is actually a beautiful one, because it comes from order. In chaos, everyone has to fight. Everyone is in eternal war. Everyone is in the constant bellum omni contra omnes. Inside a condition of protracted order and morality, people can be neutral. People can have their leisure time for things that they actually value. But this is not the situation that we're walking into now, and the centrists are basically deceiving themselves. They deceive themselves that this is a comfortable middle ground that can be sold as an entertainment product, and it really cannot be sold as an entertainment product, no matter how much we try. Okay. All right, Torm McCabe for $5. You were one of the people who was, well, I recognize you from previous streams too, but you were arguing with Adam and Sitch on Twitter as well. So Torm McCabe says, if the Supreme Court makes racial preferences illegal, would you admit that Adam and Sitch's theory of left-right pendulum correction is valid? Are CRT and LGBT RUFO bills also evidence for pendulum correction? No, they're not, because I have I don't believe that the bureaucracy is actually going to follow the Supreme Court injunctions. They will ignore them. There's no they legalized affirmative action in California. That did not get rid of affirmative action. And anti-CRT bans in various states, those are not, first of all, they're not federal, so they're not a pendulum swinging back. At best, they're a stopgap. They're preventing the left from advancing forward. And they will slow the left down, but they're not a complete solution, even less so a pendulum, because the solution is getting rid of the teachers. Until you get rid of the teachers, either by taking your kids out of school and putting them in some system that has teachers who are ideologically aligned with you, or just by finding some way to getting rid of them from the school system altogether, which would be, a broader set of reforms. Until you do that, the problem has just moved. You've slowed the left down. You haven't actually stopped them. And this is not, again, and even if you did stop them, it wouldn't be a pendulum swing. The pendulum swinging would be you basically going into universities and having your ideology spread there. It's not stopping the creep of progressive ideologies at some grade level. So it would take a lot more for the pendulum theory to have any water. This is the continuous thing that the Adam and Sitch try to avoid, is just how much ground has been lost by people who were arguing their positions in the past. This has not worked. The people who were arguing their positions in 1995 and in 2005 lost the entire university system. And no Andrew Sullivan arguments did anything to stop that. And the Andrew Sullivans of the world didn't even take their money out of the universities. They continuously fed money into the universities that were subverting their stated principles. Maybe I can't arrest the thing in its entirety, but at least I can not have my money fuel the beast that is actively pushing forward antithetical principles to my own. And again, if you're not thinking like this, and you're an Adam and Sitch's audience, when you laugh at the wokies, the joke is on you, because your money, in the form of money given to the public school system, in the form of money paid to the university system, in the form of your college degree, it's all going to woke causes. And if there's not a greater plan to separate yourself from that, or to establish your identity in something that is beyond those liberal frameworks that are constantly pouring gasoline on the fire of the ideology you think is crazy by your own admission, then the joke is on you. And in Adam and Sitch can call the wokies crazy, they can call Vosh stupid as much as they want. The Vosh ideas are going to be around in 20 years, and I don't see where the Adam and Sitch ideas are not. Everyone ultimately in Adam and Sitch's community is either going to find himself in a right-wing community because he's professed principles that are beyond liberalism, or they're going to be totally out of power, and they're going to essentially be cargo cultists for liberal promises of equal protection that haven't been active for 50 years, very much like the cargo cultists of, the Solomon Islands. You're building airstrips for planes that haven't landed in 40 years. Adam and Sitch are trying to invoke liberal principles of equal protection that haven't been actively part of the discourse of the American ruling class since 1991. But suddenly, 30 years later, after those ideas have consolidated power, now, things are going to change. I don't know. So Nerve AMV Maker, in response to Torin McCabe, Nerve AMV Maker, you're repeating the same argument, but to read your super chat, it's in response to Torin McCabe, any court ruling against CRT will be narrowly tailored rule with a limited scope. This is what Republicans always do. How well did the Defense of Marriage Act defend marriage? Yeah, and even if it does have a broad scope, the bureaucracies will ignore this. Because if we get rid of affirmative action in any realistic sense, this will radically de-diversify the universities. An enormous number of African Americans in particular who are currently going to college are going to not go to college anymore. Or are going to go to radically worse college, not radically, but they're going to go to a tier or two below what they ordinarily got into. And if we get rid of HR departments, an enormous number of people who got employed with these sort of cultural studies degrees aren't going to be employable. And these are the current ruling class. And the judges know this. And so their temptation is to A, rule narrowly, or B, if they rule broadly, be assured that the bureaucracy is never going to have to actually implement any of these massive upheavals. Iron Duke 99 for $3. Glad to see you standing up to Adam and Sitch's left of center crap. Well, my pleasure. I just don't know where there is to go from here because I'm kind of done with this Adam and Sitch thing. It makes absolutely zero sense from my point of view, and I don't know. It feels like a huge waste of time on my end. I don't see what the point is. I mean, I see the point. So I guess I see the point in reaching their audience. But the thing is, in my first live stream with Adam and Sitch, I felt like, if you read the chat and you read the super chat donations and you read the comments, it was overwhelmingly supportive. But now it's all become just a huge pile-on. On Twitter, and I have to engage with Adam and Sitch on Twitter because they're not on Telegram. So whenever I want to ask them a question, I have to go there. But their fans all pile on. If Sitch calls me evasive, they'll all pile on and call me evasive. And you ask them individually, okay, what I didn't answer? What question did I evade? And they can't answer. Like they don't know what question I haven't evaded. They just know that their parasocial media personality called me evasive, and that's what they're going for. And then so that has to be the thing, right? That has to be you're evading people. You're evading Sitch. You're not topical. You lack standing to have these things considered. That's sort of the last recourse, people who don't have good arguments against your position. Yeah, but thank you very much, Iron Duke. Cringe Walker for $3 USA. Hey Dave, doing your old PhD right now in the EU, but eager to basket weave with y'all this summer when I'm back. You going to the UK event in August? Assuming restrictions clear out by then. I don't know if I can necessarily afford that. I'll see. I mean, transatlantic plane tickets are insanely expensive. And I need to take vacation time to do that. That would be very difficult for me to do, not being a professional YouTuber. I have a fairly demanding professional job, unfortunately. But I will see what I can do. I was hoping to do an American event over the summer, but I'm going to have to follow up on that. Okay, so Waterloo Vids for USA $20. Hey Dave, I was watching a Critical Drinker video where he said he would stop reviewing Picard because it was terrible, cynical, and untrue to the original vision. Do you think this was inevitable because of the failure of Imagine Liberalism in the original series and TNG failing to deliver on all those promises? Well, I mean, this is interesting. So Picard is obviously the latest iteration of it's the latest iteration of Star Trek. I guess that was obvious, but I feel like I need to clarify it for non-Trekkies. So there is a certain number of iterations. So Star Trek was the brainchild of someone named Gene Roddenberry, who was this classic young 60-ish idealist. And his idea was there was going to be this post-secular utopia of exploration. And you can see these evolutions in the 60s when it comes on. It's basically, Captain Picard is a cowboy, but one who's more racially tolerant, who's taken on board sort of libertarian attitudes of the 1960s. And of course, being a 60s guy, he's got a new side chick every episode. And, but he's a wild cannon, right? Very, very liberated. And the Federation is this bold, pioneering, spacefaring step forward into the future. By the 80s, it's moderated, and it's become it's still very exploratory, but it's distinctly sort of a very UN organization. It's more bureaucratic. The Captain Picard is a thinker. He's not very much, he's not a cowboy. He's this French Englishman, Jean-Luc Picard, and everything he wants to do is negotiate. He doesn't want to ever blast the aliens. He wants to study their culture from afar. And so this was sort of an evolution. It was a more idealistic evolution of Gene Roddenberry. And then just before Gene Roddenberry died, and I don't know if this was really in keeping with his vision, the last iteration of Star Trek came in, which is Deep Space Nine, which is, I think, the last good Star Trek, most people think. And this was sort of like Game of Thrones meets Star Trek. It turns out that the Federation is not actually this idealist organization. The reason why it's so idealist is that it's just richer than all of its temporal opponents. It's sort of like the United States and the Soviet Union. It doesn't have to really worry about the Klingons or the Romulans, because the Klingons and the Romulans aren't a real threat to the Federation. The Klingons and the Romulans have to spend all of their money in military just to compete with the Federation. And what happens in Deep Space Nine is the Federation comes in conflict with a villain it's still political. It's not like the Borg, which is just sort of this force of nature. But it comes in conflict with a political entity that is like it, but evil and way richer and way bigger. And what you see is the Federation sort of pulling out the stops. The hard political realities become real again, and it has to make decisions between principle and winning the war. And so, like, this is sort of, it subverts the genre slightly. The problem with this new stuff is that Deep Space Nine was how we can, obviously, the original series was, this is liberalism, it's just freedom and exploration. The 80s, 90s Next Generation was, we're the UN, we're the responsible ones, we're principled. Deep Space Nine was, let's test those principles. In the latest Star Trek, the problem is just it's basically just self-congratulatory bullshit. The problem is not that it's a worldview in crisis. It's a worldview that does not want to acknowledge how it's in crisis. What the story they want to tell is everything about the Next Generation worldview was going great, and then bad actors, like evil people, destroyed it all. And so we need to find the bad people and get the good people to come in and fix everything. So it's not like Deep Space Nine, where the Federation has to wrestle with its own internal contradictions. The fact that its idealism is built on a phony premise of always being richer than their enemies. This is the Next Generation, or sorry, the new Star Treks like Discovery and Picard. All it is just them. It's basically more and more what it's become is progressives having struggle sessions and cathartic therapy sessions in their entertainment. They want to say that we're the good guys, and everything else, everyone who's forcing us to violate our principles is evil. This is another one of the reasons, there was this moment in the dialogue with Sitch that kind of demonstrated this, where Sitch said, he asked me about a shit take I had about Ukraine, and I essentially gave him the line that, well, the best take you can have about Ukraine is Putin has no agency. And Sitch said, well, no, Putin absolutely has agency. And this is such a fundamental disconnect, right? Like, okay, so so let's say that you're in Deep Space Nine and you're faced with the Dominion, and they're bad dudes and are cutting in on your territory. Discovery and Picard, they just want to call them bad. What they would say is, well, the Dominion has agency, doesn't it? It has agency, therefore they're bad, and then we'll just magically win because we're the Mary Sues of our own universe. That's the wrong lesson. The lesson of the Dominion is, this is what the Dominion does. And you're either going to deal with this reality of this is how the Dominion operates, or you're going to be buried by that reality, and you're going to get a lot more people killed than need to be killed. And that's the sort of step that Star Trek refuses to take. Game of Thrones worked right up into the point where they discarded cynical politics. The point where Daenerys Targaryen becomes Medea and burns the city, that was actually, spoiler alert, that was actually like the best part of a very, very, very bad set of last seasons. The problem, the sort of quintessential bad moment of Star Trek, I only know this because it was repeated on Telegram, was when Stacey Abrams appears as the president of Earth, and she meets the black captain of the new Enterprise, or whatever the flagship thing is, and they just sit staring at each other, gloating, patting each other on the back about how good they are, how noble it is to be part of the Federation. Man, we're just so good for being us. And it's just so funny because that's there's no tension, there's no catharsis, there's something learned. It's just a moment where the cameo Stacey Abrams, who again is a horrible politician in my opinion, for the disastrous fiasco she engineered in the Middle East in the Arab Spring, and she's just gloating about how good her character is next to another character who's patting herself on the back for being a good character, and this is the kind of asinine rabbit hole you get down when you start talking about how Putin has agency. I mean, it's bullshit. He does what he does, and we react to it. We either fight over Ukraine, or we try to come to terms with his military supremacy and sign a peace treaty that does not create a global food crisis, which is the only responsible thing to do. TN1 for $3 USA. I loved your Everything Wrong with Nerd Culture series. One thing you brought up, what makes Warhammer 40k unconsciously reactionary? I love it for the Shakespearean drama, but could you elaborate? Well, it's been a very long time since I made that series on nerd culture. I do intend to do a full 3-hour live stream on Warhammer for my 40k celebration. Get it? Because it would be distributed 40k, which will, I don't know, at the current rate, that will be in what, a year? Based on my tamped down YouTube growth stuff that's coming from this stuff. It's pretty simple. 40k, Warhammer 40k, for those uninitiated, it's a sci-fi setting that borrows heavily from Dune, and it's gothic, and it historically borrows its motifs. What borrows its motifs from the 30 Years' War and from the very late medieval periods. So things like inquisitions and plagues and people in torture devices, and it really leans into the gothicness. And so this is something I said in my Skildings talk. Reactionaries like gothic settings because gothic settings force into stark contrast. Gothic settings can be optimistic or they can be pessimistic, right? Lord of the Rings is a type of gothic setting, but it's a more optimistic one. But what gothic settings all invariably do is force into stark relief the moral positions of the characters involved and their orientations with how they choose moral positions and how they fight for them, and how those positions cost them dearly on the battlefield. And so it's very hard to make a grimdark gothic setting woke. They'll make Warhammer woke. There's no question about that in my mind. But they can't do that without removing its gothic and grimdark elements. I think you ought to see a prefiguration of this in things like Age of Sigmar, which is Warhammer with a lot of its harsh edges removed. The other thing that the Warhammer gets is it absolute Warhammer 40k in particular absolutely nails the sort of ancient understanding of evil. The ancient understanding of evil is not equivalent, but almost equivalent to chaos, with good being equivalent to order. This is what late 19th century thinkers, studiers of anthropology called the Chaos Kampf, or the war against chaos that you see in Egyptian and Sumerian and Chinese and Indian origin stories and Norse origin stories, right? The hero represents chaos and he vanquishes the hero represents order and he vanquishes the dragon of chaos, as Jordan Peterson says. They also capture sort of how human treachery had a role in exacerbating that chaos, and how chaos sort of feeds on itself. And even though chaos itself is very nearly nothing, it looks like, when it comes in contact with living souls, it looks like a virus. It behaves like a living volitional thing that has its own will and desire, and desire for power. And Warhammer just nails this understanding of chaos. And for that, it's a very useful reactionary text. So Sam153, he says, for USA $20, thank you very much. Thanks for the stream. Appreciate your clear thinking as always. Well, thank you very much. Hunter Counts for US $3. Have you read Academic Agent's book? Also on the topic of dating, what is your outlook on the dating scene for the Zoomer generation? Ugh. Okay, wow. So I haven't read Academic Agent's book because it just came out. I would like to buy it and read it. I would like to spend more of my money on books that come from places like Imperium Press. I want to get Owen Cyclops' comic. I want to buy Zero H.P. Lovecraft's book, and also the Passage Prize entries. I'm going to be all over the Passage Prize winners when they finally publish them. I'll probably do a live stream on that. It's so important that we support creators who are coming from this perspective, because in the end, this is all we're going to have, is what we create ourselves. This is why it's important for people to know that, like, well, I appreciate the super chats. I am doing this because I'm doing this, because this is my community, and that's my orientation, right? I just committed to it. It's like what Charlemagne said. Charlemagne was my own personal hero, the YouTuber, not the king, when he said, things got more clearer for me when I just woke up one morning and said, I'm just not taking the vaccine. That's just it. I am not taking it, no matter what, unless they literally hold me down and put it into my veins. And that's why I said with this YouTube channel, I don't care if I don't make money. I will continue to keep it going until they literally take me off YouTube. And I'll probably keep it going on Odyssey. Because I think that this is valuable to have this conversation going on. Even if we rehash a few of our points. Who's going to have an original take every single week, right? Like, people are going to groan, oh my God, it's the same arguments against liberalism that we've heard 1,000 times. Okay, but I guess there's some people in Adam and Sitch's community that still haven't caught on to this. Is the reason why, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Is that the reason why this isn't highlight? Is the reason, that would be amazing. Okay. It would be amazing if that were the thing, that the entropy actually has to be playing in my window in order for the thing to select properly. Yeah. Well, okay. I don't think I've ever really mastered the entropy integration with OBS, so forgive me. Oh, yes. Okay, yes. The dating scene on the Zoomer generation. Well, see, the thing is, I only can give dating advice to millennials, because the big elephant in the room is the lockdowns. What has been going on in the dating scene with the lockdowns? Okay, so when you're in a dating scene, if you're a younger person, the number one goal is to find a dating pool that is oriented in your direction. This can be a religious community. This can be an online dating site. This can be a circle of friends. This can be an event. But it has to be a circle of people who do things together where you're reasonably aligned on moral positions. And see, the thing is, I have more ideas at this stage in my life about how someone like me could create one of these communities than I do about how you as a Zoomer right-winger could join one. Because your options at this point really are religious dating sites and religious communities. to my knowledge, those are the only two places that are set up right now to do this. The issue is that I guess, and also the lockdowns, like the COVID stuff, you want to meet physically with people. You don't want to communicate. I mean, of course, meet people online if you possibly can, but you need to get the online to real life as soon as possible. You have to get online to real life as soon as possible, and you have to immediately ascertain whether the woman in question is open to your values at minimum, shares your values, is preferable, and respects you, and is keen, and you're attracted to her, right? I mean, yeah, for most guys, let's be honest, that's, you can work with a lot in that dimension. I mean, that should not disqualify an extraordinary amount of women. That should disqualify very, very few. It's essential, but it should disqualify a very small amount of women if we're being honest as men, right? But the values and the respect are key, and the in real life mating is key. And the other thing is, I want to remind people of this too. If you're a guy who has had traditionally bad luck with women, as I was in my early 20s, the lesson is, don't go. The starting point is not groups of women, it's groups of men. Learn how to be a good guy friend and win the respect of men. And if you have experience winning the respect of men, that will rub off on you and you'll be able to win the respect of women. So try to develop a core group of guy friends that do things, and hopefully they do things that are reasonably competitive, so you feel how the dynamic works. So you know how it is to win and be respected for that win in that day. That will give you an avenue in how to win the respect of women. But from that point, you find the dating. Once you have that ability to kind of win women's respect, you find the dating pool. You come into physical contact with women, and you ascertain the three things I said. Do they respect you? Open to your values, and are you attracted to them? And then, then I think you have a prospect. And then, then there's the typical interplay of courtship, the give and take that comes from that. And, in that realm, it's highly individualized and anything goes, right? But I think that most Zoomers' problems are just that initial set of things. The big mystery box, though, for Zoomers is what is that initial group of people? Obviously, online dating is still up. From my experience, the mainstream online dating circles are trash. They're absolute dumpster fires of damaged women, and they encourage the exact wrong behaviors. The religious sites are obviously very, very good. They worked for me. But I feel that's kind of cheating, because I kind of met somebody through a religious dating site that I had the higher probability of meeting anyway, because I was involved in a religious community who was not the same religious community, but was literally like right next to them. We did events with those people all like on a bi-yearly basis. So that is that's my advice. I don't know what those avenues are. They're the ones, obviously, religious communities are still there. They need to get their youth groups back up, mach schnell, in my opinion. And there are religious dating sites. But once you have an online interaction, you've got to make that online interaction physical as soon as possible. Save you and her time. Also, I just wanted to say, from 100 counts for $3, I just wanted to say, to send more for a super chat. For some reason, entropy on my phone gives me an error if I try to donate anything other than $3. So have two super chats. Well, thank you very much, 100 counts. I appreciate that. Have a wonderful day. I hope I answered your question about dating thoroughly. But we as the millennials, we as the boomers, we owe the Zoomers and the Alephs or the Alphas some mechanism for dating. We got to bring back like speed dating or something like that. there's got to be something like, reactionary speed dating, religious speed dating. I don't think that most men in this community, I think they're pretty good catches. And I think there's more than a few women out there who just want men who will respect them and respect them in a courting relationship, and who have their, I'm not going to say that have traditionalist sexual morality to a T, but who have well-defined boundaries that they can rely on being respected, and that are more traditional to a very large degree. And if you're Catholic, I mean, just follow the rules. Is it that hard? Just follow the rules if you're Catholic, please. Or at least follow the 1950s rules, right? A ring on it, please. Just, that's minimal. I really do think that. Otherwise, you're part of the problem that you're trying to stop, right? I feel sometimes a little bit exasperated, right? But whatever. You only can do what you can do. So Ghost of Gen Z for $3. From where do you think reactionary art could come from? For example, rural areas or demoralized urban youths. What do you think this art should be, directly polemical or indirectly metaphorical? So I think it comes from both rural areas. I think the idea that regionalism could make a comeback is a very distinct thing. It's a very distinct possibility. Regionalism was a classic form of American art that was basically rural in its inception. Although I do think, that there's this case for having urban art come back in a real way. That's what Zero H.P. Lovecraft, obviously, that's his forte. And I think that's one reason why the ghost story or the horror story it's the one movie art form that has not been completely degenerated in American art in the 2010s. It's still with us because we live in the golden age of ghosts. We are the lifeless generation, and this is the generation that will birth 1,000 ghosts. It will birth more ghosts than it births saints. I'm losing my voice very quickly, and it is a short night for me. So I'm coming up on 2 hours, I think. So we're going to have to just say that this is the end of the super chats, and I'll end on the hour just to be nice and consistent. And this will be a longer sunset stream. I apologize for OBS not working. What is it? What is Imperium Press? Imperium Press, for Darth Killian for $3 says, what is Imperium Press? Is it a place where reactionaries could publish our books if we write them? Yeah, I believe so. Imperium Press is a publishing house that is, it specializes in reprinting people like Yaki and Juvenal and De Maistre, books that were long out of print, and for a while you couldn't get James Burnham without spending like $300 or something like that on Amazon for an antique version that was long out of print. And Imperium Press has made a point of republishing all of these people and publishing them in high quality formats. And I definitely recommend looking into their catalog. Obviously, this is a publishing house, people. Just because Imperium Press publishes it does not mean that I endorse the ideas. Obviously, they have a lot of people who were associated with the mid-century Germans that I probably wouldn't like very much. But this is a publishing house that publishes ideas that have been long out of print, that are thoroughly, thoroughly interesting. One person, I think that this is the person that it's named after, but Yaki, that he published a book called Imperium, and this was there was an amazing speech at the Sildings event. It was Paul Fahrenheit gave an amazing analysis of Yaki in relation to our current political moment that really made me want to read Imperium. But it's pretty far down on my list, to be quite honest. But yeah, I highly recommend them. On the question of art, I think it's really going to come from two dimensions. The first dimension is going to be we have to adequately portray the world that we see around us in all its sort of warts and all its sort of glorious degradation. And in that world, we have to find elements of hope that are small and that are true and that we can bring forward and make people believe in. There's not going to be any art that people don't believe in anymore that's fun. I think art as spectacle has run its course. Art has to be no longer about spectacle. Art has to be about confession, and it has to be about hope. And without those two components, I don't think that there's a pathway back through authentic art, because I don't think we're going to be, I mean, you can do art as spectacle and make the spectacle look deliciously grotesque. I think that we do live in the age of the grotesque. I was on this podcast called The Beautiful Toilet, which is itself a reference to avant-garde art, and he told me of this meme called the ugly polycule, which is a reference to polyamorous people. They call their little groups polycules, which is a disgusting term itself. And I feel like that could be the caption for 1,000 pieces of grotesque art. Give me a grotesque art piece depicting the ugly polycule, and I'll put it up in a museum. I'll have an entire room dedicated to the ugly polycule in art. It could be like the pictures of demons from the old Flemish masters. But that being said, there has to be a necessary component of hope and redemption. The story I want to hear more than anything else, to get back to one of the super chatters talked about courting, he himself having a checkered history and courting a woman who was recovering from a checkered history in post-sexual revolution reality. So much of courting a woman is respecting her, and so much of I don't mean simping for her, I don't mean cucking to her, I mean respecting. And there's a big difference, because a lot of progressive men say respecting when they mean cucking or simping or something like that, and there's a big difference. But so much of respecting a woman is making her feel that she is a heroine and that she is part of a story, and she is part of something that's good and true, and most importantly for women, beautiful. And the biggest part of being a woman with a checkered past is that we have so few pieces in art of the redeemed woman. I want more than anything else to have a heroine appear in fiction, a modern Mary Magdalene, a modern woman redeemed of a past checkered history, who then rediscovers virtue and her own heroism inside that virtue in a non-masculine way. What is that hero of, is it Fanny? Yeah, the hero of Mansfield Park. Mansfield Park is this Jane Austen novel where Jane Austen, Mansfield Park is people hate it because Jane Austen was obviously a conservative, even in her own time. And she really shows her power level as a conservative in Mansfield Park, because her heroine is this reactionary who is criticizing other young people for putting on a play. I believe the heroine's name's Fanny Price, and she is hated by feminists. But if I were a reactionary art creator, and I wanted to simultaneously give hope to people in the reactionary movement, and also provide a path forward for women, and create interesting art, I would have a modern day Fanny Price, a modern day Mary Magdalene, redeemed from her checkered history as a progressive, with all her witticism, and maybe that would be a detail. Don't make it polemical, please. That would ruin the art. But with all her witticism intact, and then from her tiny way, interacting with the world, she kind of pokes holes in all the little contradictions around her in delightful ways. I think that would make I would read the hell out of a modern Mansfield Park with a kind of modern Mary Magdalene Fanny Price heroine. I think that would be delightful. I think maybe that a woman might have to write that to get the dynamic right, but that would be absolutely brilliant, and that would provide humor and hope in equal measure. But and it's so funny, I haven't seen a book like that in I think you could actually find books like that in early 20th century, but no one's writing them. No one's writing them yet, because I think there's demand for that. So with that being said, we are at the hour. I think I've answered all of my super chats, people. So I'm going to let the chat clear for 5 minutes. And because it's really, really late on my end, I'll just wish everyone a very happy... Oh, by the way, I should say, this is Easter. We are in the week of Easter. We are in the week of the glorious mysteries. My wife and I we're continuing our Lenten tradition of saying a rosary every night, which I have to go do now. This is Easter week, so please, if you are a Catholic or another Western Christian, the Easterns don't have their Holy Week this week, I'm told. Please keep that in your hearts and go forward and do God's work, and whatever that means to you in your own tradition and with your own guidance. So have a good night, everyone, and God bless.